September 5th, 1946, Stone Town, the capital of Zanzibar Island off the coast of East Africa. In a modest house near the spice markets, a Parsi family welcomed their first child into their arms. Prayers were sung in the ancient Avestan language. Incense burned as the priest blessed the newborn baby boy. They named him Farrokh Bulsara. The name meant fortunate or blessed in Persian. It was a good Parsi name, connecting the child to his ancestors who had fled persecution in Persia 1,000 years earlier, carrying their ancient fire-worshipping faith to India and beyond. Nobody in that room could have imagined that this shy, gentle boy would one day become Freddie Mercury, one of the most flamboyant, fearless performers in rock history. Nobody could have known that Farrokh Bulsara would disappear entirely, transformed into something the world had never seen before. But that transformation didn't happen overnight. It took decades of struggle, reinvention, and the courage to shed every part of his past that didn't fit the person he was meant to become. Welcome to Story Factory. I'm here to take you back through the lives of the stars who shaped our memories, the journeys from obscurity to legend, the transformations that changed music forever. Today, we're opening the story of how Farrokh Bulsara became Freddie Mercury, a story about identity, immigration, culture, sexuality, and the ultimate act of reinvention. This isn't just a story about changing your name, it's a story about creating yourself from scratch, about refusing to be limited by where you came from, and about the price you pay when you choose to become someone completely new. Let's go back to the beginning. Zanzibar in the 1940s and 50s was a melting pot. A British protectorate, it was home to Arabs, Africans, Indians, and a small community of Parsis, Zoroastrians who had left India generations earlier seeking opportunity in East Africa. The Bulsara family fit into this complex cultural landscape. Bomi Bulsara worked as a cashier for the British Colonial Office. His wife, Jair, was a gentle, traditional Parsi woman who ran the household and later gave birth to a daughter, Kashmira, Farrokh's younger sister. Young Farrokh was a quiet, sensitive child. He had large, dark eyes, a gap between his front teeth that he'd carry his whole life, and a shyness that made him seem almost invisible in group settings. He loved to draw, to listen to his mother's radio, to watch the ships coming and going from the harbor. The Parsi community was small and tight-knit. They maintained their ancient traditions, the prayers in Avestan, the sacred fire temples, the emphasis on good thoughts, good words, good deeds. But they also adapted to the modern world, sending their children to English schools, embracing British customs alongside their Persian heritage. For Farrokh, this meant learning to exist in multiple worlds simultaneously. At home, he was Farrokh Bulsara, son of a respectable Parsi family. At school, he tried to be like the other boys, British, colonial, proper, but he never quite fit either world perfectly. When Farrokh was 8 years old, his parents made a decision that would change his life. They sent him to boarding school in India. This was traditional for Parsi families. Education in India was considered superior, and it connected their children to their ancestral homeland. In 1954, Farrokh arrived at St. Peter's School in Panchgani, a hill station in Maharashtra, India. He was thousands of miles from home, from his parents, from everything familiar. The school was strict, British in style, designed to turn colonial subjects into proper English gentlemen. Farrokh was lonely, homesick, lost. But at St. Peter's, 3 things happened that would set him on the path to becoming Freddie Mercury. First, he discovered music. The school had a piano, and Farrokh was drawn to it. He began taking lessons, showing a natural talent. Music became his refuge, the place where the shy boy could express feelings he couldn't put into words. Second, he formed a band, called the Hectics. It was a schoolboy rock and roll group playing covers of Little Richard and Elvis Presley songs at school functions. Standing on stage, singing, Farrokh felt something he'd never felt before: power, attention, the thrill of performance. Third, and this would prove most significant, his schoolmates started calling him Freddie. Farrokh was hard for English speakers to pronounce. It sounded foreign, different, other. But Freddie was easy, friendly, English. At first, it was just a nickname, a convenience. But Farrokh embraced it. When he signed his name on school assignments, he wrote, Freddie. When he introduced himself to new people, he said, I'm Freddie. It was the first step in leaving Farrokh Bulsara behind. Freddie spent the next several years at St. Peter's, improving as a musician, growing more confident as a performer. But he was also absorbing a painful lesson. To succeed in a British-dominated world, you had to seem British. Your difference, your foreign name, your exotic background, your cultural traditions, was something to hide, not celebrate. In 1963, 17-year-old Freddie returned to Zanzibar. He'd been gone for nearly a decade, returning only for holidays. Now he was back, a young man trying to figure out what came next. But Zanzibar itself was changing. Political tension was rising between the Arab ruling class and the African majority. The island was moving toward independence from Britain, and that transition was becoming violent. On January 12, 1964, revolution erupted. The Sultan was overthrown in a bloody uprising. Thousands of Arabs and Indians were killed. The Bulsara family's world collapsed overnight. Bomi and Jair made a desperate decision: flee to England. Britain was offering asylum to refugees from Zanzibar, and the Bulsaras had British protectorate passports. They packed what they could carry, left behind their home and their life, and boarded a plane to London. 17-year-old Freddie arrived in England as a refugee. The family settled in Feltham, a working-class suburb of London. They had no money, no connections, no safety net. Bomi found work wherever he could. Jair tried to maintain their Parsi traditions in a tiny flat in a foreign country. And Freddie? Freddie had to reinvent himself all over again. England in 1964 was not welcoming to immigrants, especially brown-skinned immigrants from former colonies. Freddie faced prejudice, both subtle and overt. People looked at his face and heard his slight accent and saw him as foreign, lesser, not quite British. He enrolled at Isleworth Polytechnic, then Ealing Art College to study graphic design. He was talented. His artwork was imaginative, bold, influenced by Art Nouveau and Aubrey Beardsley. But art school was also where Freddie's sense of identity began to fracture more deeply. At Ealing, he encountered London's emerging counterculture. Hippies, artists, musicians, people experimenting with drugs and sexuality and new ways of being. For the first time, Freddie saw people who didn't fit conventional molds and weren't ashamed of it. He started dressing more flamboyantly: tight jeans, scarves, jewelry, long hair. His Parsi family found it shocking. But Freddie was discovering something. He didn't want to blend in anymore. He wanted to stand out. He was also discovering his sexuality. This was perhaps the most painful part of his identity struggle. In Parsi culture in 1960s Britain, homosexuality was unthinkable. It was illegal, shameful, something to hide. Freddie tried to suppress it. He dated women. He convinced himself it was just a phase. But the truth kept surfacing, undeniable and terrifying. To be Farrokh Bulsara, dutiful Parsi son, he would have to marry a woman, have children, follow tradition. But that person felt like a prison, a lie. To be who he really was, he would have to become someone else entirely. During his years at Ealing, Freddie threw himself into music. He joined bands, Ibex, Wreckage, playing small gigs in London pubs. He worked odd jobs to survive, hauling luggage at Heathrow Airport, running a second-hand clothes stall at Kensington Market. But all the while, he was building a persona. Not Farrokh Bulsara, shy refugee from Zanzibar, but Freddie, confident, flamboyant, impossible to ignore. The final transformation came in 1970. Freddie met a band called Smile, guitarist Brian May, a brilliant astrophysics student, and drummer Roger Taylor, a handsome dental student. Their lead singer had just quit. Freddie had been watching them perform, and he knew this was his chance. He approached them with absolute confidence. "I'm going to be your new lead singer," he told them, "and we're going to be huge." Brian and Roger were skeptical. This eccentric guy from the art college? But when Freddie auditioned, when he opened his mouth and that voice came out, powerful, precise, with a 4-octave range, they knew this was something special. Freddie had ideas, big ideas. He didn't just want to be in a band. He wanted to create something theatrical, operatic, unlike anything in rock music. And he wanted a new name, something bold, memorable, larger than life. "We'll call ourselves Queen," Freddie announced. Brian and Roger hesitated. Queen? It was provocative, possibly too much. "It's regal," Freddie insisted. "It's strong. It's outrageous. We are Queen." And for himself, he needed a name worthy of Queen, not Farrokh Bulsara. That name belonged to a boy who no longer existed. A boy from a place he could never return to, from a culture he'd left behind, from a life that had died when revolution came to Zanzibar. He needed something new, something connected to his love of astrology. He was a Virgo, ruled by Mercury. Something connected to his personality, quick, mercurial, impossible to pin down, something that sounded like a rock star, Freddie Mercury. It was perfect. Mercury, the Roman messenger god, fleet-footed, associated with communication and commerce. Mercury, the liquid metal, impossible to hold, constantly shifting form. Mercury, the planet closest to the sun, burning bright, impossible to look away from. Farrokh Bulsara signed his last documents, and Freddie Mercury was born. His family struggled with the transformation. His mother, Jer, tried to understand, tried to accept that her son had become someone unrecognizable. His father, Bomi, was more traditional, more uncomfortable with Freddie's flamboyance, his lifestyle, his rejection of Parsi values. But Freddie was unwavering. He loved his family, maintained contact with them throughout his life. But he also drew a firm line. He was Freddie Mercury now. Farrokh Bulsara was gone. In interviews years later, when journalists asked about his background, Freddie was evasive. "I'm Persian," he'd say vaguely, never mentioning Zanzibar, never explaining Parsi culture. He reinvented his history, made it mysterious and exotic, but never specific. He didn't want to be defined by where he came from. He wanted to be defined by what he created. The transformation wasn't just about a name. It was about everything. Freddie Mercury didn't just change his name, he changed his teeth, or rather refused to fix them because he believed they gave his voice its unique resonance. His clothes, increasingly flamboyant and theatrical. His mannerisms, commanding, confident, the opposite of shy Farrokh. His sexuality, eventually accepting and even celebrating his attraction to men, though never fully coming out in the modern sense. He created a character, Freddie Mercury, rock god, and then became that character so completely that the original Farrokh disappeared. But there was a cost. Cultural isolation. Freddie cut himself off from the Parsi community, from his heritage, from the traditions his parents held sacred. He celebrated Christmas, not Zoroastrian festivals. He ate foods forbidden by Parsi dietary laws. He lived a life unrecognizable to his ancestors. Family tension. His parents loved him, but they didn't fully understand him. The gap between Freddie Mercury, the rock star, and Farrokh Bulsara, the son, was too wide. They attended a few Queen concerts, uncomfortable in the crowd, watching their son perform in costumes and makeup, singing songs about controversial subjects. Identity confusion. Some part of Freddie never fully resolved who he was. Was he Persian, Indian, British, none of the above? In interviews, he'd deflect questions about his origins. "Does it matter?" he'd ask. I'm a citizen of the world. But it did matter, because you can run from your past, but you carry it with you. And sometimes, late at night, alone in his mansion, surrounded by Persian art and antiques, Freddie would remember. Remember Stonetown. Remember his mother's prayers. Remember a shy boy named Farrokh who used to watch ships in the harbor and dream of faraway places. The final irony, the thing Freddie ran from, his foreignness, his otherness, his difference, was precisely what made him special. In a rock world dominated by white British and American men, Freddie Mercury stood out. His exotic looks, his theatrical sensibility, influenced by Indian cinema and Persian art, his refusal to conform to gender norms or sexual expectations, these things, rooted in his multicultural background, made him iconic. If he'd been just another British rock singer, he might have been successful. But he wouldn't have been Freddie Mercury. The transformation was necessary, but it was also tragic, because Farrokh Bulsara wasn't worthless. He was the foundation on which Freddie Mercury was built. The shy boy who found solace in music, the immigrant who learned to survive in hostile environments, the artist who saw beauty in Persian miniatures and brought that aesthetic to Queen's album covers. Freddie never reconciled these two selves. He kept them separate. Freddie, the public persona, Farrokh, the private truth. But in his final years, perhaps there was some healing. When Freddie Mercury was dying of AIDS, when he knew time was running out, he called his parents, spoke to them in Gujarati, the language of his childhood. Let them visit. Let them see him vulnerable, no longer the invincible rock star, but their son again. His mother, Jer, later said that in those final months, she saw glimpses of Farrokh, the sweet, gentle boy she'd raised. Still Freddie, still strong in his own way, but softer, more willing to remember. When Freddie died on November 24th, 1991, his funeral followed Zoroastrian tradition. His body was carried by Parsi priests. Ancient prayers were sung in Avestan. The sacred fire was lit. Farrokh Bulsara and Freddie Mercury finally united in death. Maybe you never knew that Freddie Mercury was born Farrokh Bulsara. Maybe you never thought about what it cost him to become the person the world knew. Maybe you assumed he was always confident, always flamboyant, always Freddie. But nobody is born a rock god. They become one through struggle, through reinvention, through the courage to shed the expectations placed on them and create themselves anew. Freddie Mercury showed us that transformation is possible, that you don't have to be limited by your background, your family's expectations, or society's narrow definitions of who you should be. But he also showed us the cost, the isolation, the loss of connection to your roots, the impossibility of ever fully explaining yourself to people who only see the surface. Rest in peace, Farrokh Bulsara. Rest in peace, Freddie Mercury. You were both, and you were neither. You were something new, something the world had never seen before and will never see again. A refugee who became a king, a shy boy who became a legend, an impossible transformation that changed music forever. Before we close, a brief note. This story is based on publicly available information, biographies, interviews with family and friends, and historical records. Some conversations and small details have been dramatized to bring Freddie's journey to life, but the heart of this story, the transformation, the struggle, and the triumph, is real. If this story made you see Freddie Mercury differently, if it reminded you that every legend has a hidden history, consider subscribing to Story Factory. We're here to tell the untold stories, the transformations and struggles behind the icons we think we know. Because every star has a beginning, and every beginning deserves to be remembered. Thank you for listening. Until next time.